for people, animals and the planet.
This meeting is being recorded.
And this takes place just ahead of the jam-packed Circular Economy Week next week, so hopefully it's a really timely discussion. We've got an hour today and we've got some really fantastic speakers lined up for you, so a lot to get through, so I'll keep this bit short. But I just wanted to cover a small bit of housekeeping. As you'll have seen from the Zoom notification, we are recording the session today, and then we normally place this online for others who couldn't join us today. So if you're uncomfortable, please do feel free to turn off your camera. You are muted today, but please do use the chat function, and we really welcome you to introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about the work that you do, your interest in food, circular economy, and please do ask questions for our speakers. We'll be having a session later for question and answers, but as you go, if anything comes up, please do add that in the chat box and we'll cover as many as we can throughout the session. And just to make our lives a little bit easier, if you wouldn't mind just popping a Q in front of your question, and just so we know the difference between a question and a comment. And if it's for a specific speaker, please do let us know so we can direct that for you. So just a really quick overview of Food Talks. We've been going for 7 years now, and our aim is to stimulate debate and empower people to take action on critical issues that affect our food system. So we're a partnership of 4 organisations, so I'm really happy that today we're joined by the Food Ethics Council, Organico, and also Impact Hub King's Cross. And I'm going to be introducing you to our co-host Muir from Impact Hub King's Cross in just a moment. We'll introduce you to our speakers. But just before we introduce you to the speakers, we're going to do a really quick poll so we can understand a bit more about those of you who just joined us today. And then when we end the session later, we'll also do a poll just so we can hear a bit about your experience of today's session and what you've learned. So Dan, if you're happy to share your screen, we can get that poll started. Thank you. So as you can see at the top of this slide, there is the menti.com website to go to. Dan's also going to put this in the chat so you can see how to access it. And there is a code accessed, which is 81471528, which will take you to the questions that we put forward. So we'd love to hear from you about which best describes the sector that you're from. So whether you're from food and farming business, third sector NGO, policy making, if you're just interested today, etc. So if you can enter any information, that would be fantastic. We can get a sense of who's in the room. Great, so high percentage coming from third sector NGO, some academia, food and farming, brilliant. Thanks to everybody who's welcoming in the chat. Please do feel free for those who are joining us to let us know who you are and where you're from. And great to have some voices in the room for policy making too, and those who are interested in the subject. Fab. Dan, would you like to go to the next one in this section? Fabulous. So we'd love to know where you're based. This used to be an in-person event, and hopefully at some point in the future we'll be meeting in person again. But it's just really great to know where you've joined us from today, so we can see if you're from the rest of the world, rest of Europe, if you're joining us from the UK. So please do let us know. Fantastic. Great, thank you. And it would be fantastic just so we can understand a bit about what your understanding of this topic within the room. So could you please let us know whether you strongly disagree or strongly agree with the statements on the screen? So whether you understand what a circular economy means, whether circular food and farming is possible, and whether circular food systems will be the norm by 2030. Brilliant, thank you. And hopefully our fab speakers today are going to give us some really good examples of what we can learn underneath that first statement. So thanks everybody for participating. I think that's that for that section. Wonderful. I'm going to hand over to Muir now, who's going to give you an introduction into each of the 3 speakers that we've got today. So Muir, can I pass to you?
Lovely. Okay, thank you, Hannah. Well, echoing Hannah, really delighted to have you all join us this evening and Food Talks. And we're very lucky to have three speakers who are all experts on the practice and theory of circularity in food research and agroecology. So tonight we will hear from George Young, who is an agroecological farmer of 1,200 acres at Fobbing Farm in Essex. Joe Liang, founder of Collybox, London's first reusable lunchbox scheme, and Josh Newton, Cities Activation Manager at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So to kick off the talks tonight, we'll pass the floor to Josh Newton, who will explain about what the circular economy framework means to us all as actors for change, consumers and producers, and tell us some more about the current initiatives of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So welcome, and over to you, Josh.
Brilliant, thanks, Mia. I am just going to try and share screen. I'm really sorry, I don't have loads of slides, but I always think it's nice to have a visual rather than you looking at me. Firstly, a quick shout out to whoever said they were from the Northeast. That's where I'm originally from, so it's always nice to see some representation there. Today, I am going to talk to you about what the circular economy is, its principles, the role of food within that circular economy, and then crucially, I want to focus on the power and opportunity of food design. We have lots of other pieces of work around cities, biodiversity, and climate, but I want to spend the time today talking about the power of design. So just quickly on the foundation and me. So as Mia mentioned, I'm Cities Activation Manager at the foundation. So work with city governments, local authorities, and city actors in Europe, trying to help them to accelerate the circular economy. And the foundation, what we do, we are a international charity committed to developing and promoting the idea of a circular economy. We're a network of around 2,000 organizations, so some of the biggest businesses in the world, some of the smallest, innovators, as well as academics and researchers, and institutions, governments, and cities. And we are a movement. We don't own the circular economy. I am not an expert in the circular economy by any means. This is like an open source initiative where we are trying to change the status quo. We don't just promote and make an environmental case for this. We're trying to create a new economic system, one that is more distributed, diverse, and inclusive. A mindset shift on how we take, make, and waste stuff. It's driven by design and based on three principles: eliminating waste, circulating products and materials, and regenerating nature. If there's one thing I want you to take home, it's that the circular economy is based on those three principles, and I'll probably come back to them at some point. So yeah, to help illustrate those principles, we'll talk about food and then design. So our current food system, extractive food system, is a perfect example of our current linear economy. It's reliant on finite resources, fossil fuels, a large number of chemical-based inputs, which we then intensively grow and produce food from. We make food, either fresh or highly processed things, and often a large amount of it is then wasted. And we know only about 2% of organic material is looped back either in cities or back to nature to farmers or growers. So this is a really linear system that just creates more and more waste. It's high input, low output. The consequences of that linear system, we know many of them. A third of greenhouse gas emissions are contributed from food and agriculture. We know that half of human-induced biodiversity loss is caused by food. We know about soil infertility. The amount of pesticides and chemicals we're using is leading to significant soil impacts. I think some people estimate that we only have 60 harvests left before our soil quality is diminished beyond return. We also know things about ocean acidification, waterway, like nitrogen runoff, things like that. Food waste, something like 30% of all food is never actually eaten. It's lost or wasted along the value chain. And I've talked about a number of externalities or problems with our food system before we get to the things around health and obesity and the lack of access or affordability for people, not only in the UK, not only around the world, but here in the UK. So this graphic I have on here is our vision for how we want to change the food system. And it's using our 3 principles, as I mentioned: eliminate, circulate, regenerate, and designing a farming system and a food production system that works with nature, regenerates rather than against it. So on the left, you can see here, if you were on a train in the UK, you'd probably see these vistas on the left of the screen where we have lots of monocropping. You can see that heavy machinery and lots of wheat. We're very committed to just only growing a few crops and lots of it. And to the right, you can see we start slowly transitioning our food system to one that uses regenerative principles or agroecological principles, things like intercropping. You can see more biodiversity, less tillage, some cover cropping, some silver pasture there with the cows or the sheep on the far right. And what you can see are the wider impacts on that landscape. So I mentioned biodiversity and the more vibrant it looks, but under the ground as well, you can see the health of the soil, the root systems getting stronger and more diverse as well. This is obviously a very simplistic image, but it's, I guess, a high level vision of how we think the food system could work. So to get there, and how do we get there? We've produced a number of reports, but one thing we have found in our latest report, the Big Food Redesign, is that 40% of land in the UK and the EU alone can be influenced directly by just 10 companies, 10 fast-moving consumer goods companies. So businesses have a unique opportunity to contribute at scale and at speed to creating this nature-positive food system that we are seeking to create. And that's by setting goals, changing product portfolios, and ultimately building new relationships with farmers. And George will, I hope, talk about some of that stuff in a bit. But what I will talk about now is food design. And that's the role that businesses can play in this, and what we as consumers should also be trying to encourage from our businesses. So this graphic here is a very conventional image of a product design concept. So how we would ultimately make a product, or a food designer would. So to come up with the concept, someone in a business or an organization has to come up with the ingredients they would select, where they come from, and then ultimately how they're delivered and the packaging. And once you have those 3 pieces of the puzzle sorted out, you then have a new product. There we go. This is a really undertapped opportunity here, that if we can motivate these businesses to see this as an opportunity to redesign food and the products that we eat, we can transform what we eat and hopefully the farming system with it. So based on our new work, where we've done some, I guess, synthesis of impacts of the transition, we've produced the Circular Design for Food Product Concept Guide. And this is based on, this is a framework, an actionable one, that's there to redesign portfolios for nature positive outcomes. And we know that using these 4, I guess, strategies that you can see in the middle here: diverse, lower impact, upcycled, and regenerative, we can create economic, environmental, and improve production yields, which can help direct us to where we want to get to. So I'll just talk about the 3, these 4 strategies in the middle really quickly. So the first thing we know is we need to diversify our food, what we eat. The genetic diversity of crops and livestock has got to, I guess, we've all moved towards the middle. And I think something like 60% of global calories come from just 4 crops: potato, wheat, corn, and rice. I always worry if I'm going to remember the 4 of them. But we know when we grow and when we farm, and hopefully George can say that I'm not just making all this stuff up, diversity can improve yields and enhance resilience effectively. It's better for soil health, having complementary crops rather than just monocropping, and it relies less on synthetic inputs because you have complementary plants that are providing different amounts of NP and K. We know when you think about diversity, when you go to a supermarket and you want to buy a potato, there's usually 2 or 3 types of different potato. There are over 4,500 types of potato in the world. So why are we only buying 2 or 3? There's an opportunity here to ultimately diversify individual ingredients, but also a wider number. Sugar, similarly, we rely on sugar cane and sugar beet for sweeteners, but there is also so many perennial crops around the world, things like date palm, coconut, monk fruit that can all, and Jerusalem artichokes can also provide a natural sweetener to products and things. So diversity is the first one. The second is lower impact. And I guess a simple way of a quick winner there is moving from higher impact meats to lower impact meats or alternative plant-based foods. But there's also within those other crops, if you think about the 4 I mentioned, how can we find lower impact ones? We've done analysis where we found that if you use peas instead of wheat for pasta, you can reduce up to 4 emissions by about 40% and increase yields. We know there's so many leguminous crops like beans and peas that really help reduce the need for synthetic inputs as well and help build soil health. The third is upcycling. And so that's, I guess, the conventional where you automatically think the circular economy is. It's about that eliminating waste principle. Obviously, we want to create that whole virtuous system. But upcycling is recognizing that, as I said, about a third of food is wasted, is never eaten. It just ends up in the bin or goes to landfill or is incinerated. And that's just the products that's the stuff that's never eaten. There's also those inedible byproducts that we often don't even see, like the shell of cacao shells. They're often wasted.
Sorry to interrupt, Josh. But yeah, could I just give you the little tinkle bell?
Yeah, cool. 30 seconds. So the final one, yeah, upcycling. There's an immense opportunity there to just find new ingredients. And then finally, there's regenerative production. We don't have any specific definition of that. There's no one size fits all approach. It has to be suitable to the local context. But ultimately, this product design concept for nature guide is a set of strategies that as food practitioners, you can look to embed in your work. And I'll stop there. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Josh. That was, we could have carried on listening. That was a great insight into the actions we can all take, try and move away from an extractive food system and help us with a viable transition. Next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Joe Liang, who is the founder of Colliebox. Jo will be sharing her experiences as an entrepreneur and sustainability campaigner with her unique business model, which helps smaller street food vendors and larger retailers supply takeaway food sustainably. So welcome, Jo. Lovely to have you here.
Hey, lovely to have everyone. Cool, I'm gonna share my screen because I have slides. Let's see. Can everyone see it? Okay, it's purple. Cool. My name is Joe, and I'm the co-founder of Colliebox. What we do is that we provide a circular model for food packaging by putting a focus on reuse. We have a very simple model, which is to take away without the throwaway, which is the kind of world that we're trying to realize with our business. So I am really sure that the problem that we're trying to attack here is extremely familiar to everyone. I'm sure, especially since we came from the lockdown, everyone have ordered some food at some point and has came in like a ton of packaging. And it is one of the problems that we're trying to solve right now in business. Disposable packaging multiplying. There's about 11 billion pieces of single-use packaging waste that is produced every single year. We of course, in our head, we would like to think that all of them are sorted in the right way, but then the reality is that a lot of the compostable packagings find difficulty to actually go to become commercially composted. Recycling packaging sometimes is hard to recycle because of the food that might be in, and all of this is very confusing for a lot of people because there's not really a lot of information that is like ready at hand for us to learn about recycling and reusing. So our model is to trying to make the use simple as possible, as convenient as single-use disposable styrofoam box, except it's way more fun and way more rewarding. So some of the background, we all know that the government and consumers, we're all calling for companies and calling for different producers to switch to like more sustainable version and switch away from single-use packaging. A lot of you might know that this April we had the packaging tax. So right now, if you import any packaging that is less than 30% recycled plastics, there's a tax on that. We just finished the consultation, I think, in February on the ban on single-use plastic packaging. So it will be great to see where those are going. And then that left a great opportunity for us to explore reuse and how we can have a different model for what we are so familiar with that is much more polluting to the earth. Sorry, I have two screens, so I keep on clicking on the wrong screen. Cool. So what we do is that we offer a track reusable packaging service to food to cold services. Our package includes an app and also administrative panel for people who are operating with our reusable boxes. And everything is very simple, plug and go. If you sign up with us today, you can be going in 2 weeks. And what it shows to the operators is that not only tracking of the reusable boxes so that we can make sure as many of them can get back to us and get reused. It also gives really important and interesting insights like carbon emissions and more. So this is sort of what the reusable boxes look like. I'm in my office, so I blur my background because my back has just so many things. Yeah, and so they can be used more than 400 times, and our return rates right now is over 90%, depending on like which places you're in. And our most active users that we actually just did like this counting. Our most active user for the last 6 months has used our box more than 180 times. So that's like some of them are using it daily and every day in the canteen, in the place where we work. And we're very happy that people enjoy reusing and the things that it comes from. It's very easy to operate it. So when you want to borrow a Collie box, you go to your phone and find a place where they are using Collie. You scan a QR code, and then your food will be served in a Collie box. We're introducing the cups too, so in the future, your coffee will be in a Collie cup. And after you finish eating it, you just find one of our drop kiosks. They're blurred in the background, but they're bright yellow, so very easy to spot. Scan a QR code on top, and then drop the box back in. They're washed, and they're supplied back to the vendors, and then the recycle can begin again. And the reason why we think it works is that we kind of put ourselves into the user's perspective and operator's perspective from the very beginning. Me and my co-founder Ming started on the street markets. We loved eating in the street markets. We both work in offices, so it's very familiar that like you try to be sustainable in your lifetime, but because so many of these street vendors and so many of the operators, they don't really, accept you bring in Tupperware because like, did you wash your Tupperware? Things like that. And then in the lockdown, there's a lot of like ban on like single use. You can't use them for a moment of time because of health concerns. So this is the simple solution that we try to design where the boxes are stored with a vendor, so you never have to like forget to bring something. And then it's washed as standard in a commercial standard that the vendors feel safe to give you the boxes. And because it works kind of in volume, and a lot of the places where we operated use a large volume, so our single-use kind of price per unit is comparable to what you will be paying for like a high-quality compostable container that very often the vendors and everyone will have these really nice compostable containers, but doesn't have the waste stream that takes care of the compostable containers. A lot of people like using it because they think it's purposeful. It's very easy to see an impact when you know how many single-use packaging waste and how much it adds up. When you choose to use Colibox, the integration is very easy for operators. You know, like you just need to sign up for us and then you'll be able to use it. It's fun for a lot of people because we have this system called Coli Coins. So the more you reuse with us, the more things you earn. We've given away like tape Britain tickets, champagne. We have had competitions where people really enjoy and really build up the habit of reusing, which is what we're trying to go for. And then for a lot of people, it's more safe because they're washed commercially and to a high standard. So they feel like they have like a peace of mind when they're reusing with us. So just want to show you some pictures of Colibox at work. So currently we work in hospitals, we work in some companies, we work in street food vendors, we work with like different supermarkets, and it's been really cool. Like people really enjoy using it. I'm very happy to see it. And I think a lot of it comes from us trying to design circularity in a way that really weaves into people's life and takes not 5 seconds more than what will you be doing normally when you're like trying to dispose of a box, which I think is a really great thing. And yeah, that's what I have to say. Feel free to ask me questions. And this is my contact detail if you want to chat with me more.
Fantastic. It's really wonderful to hear how a simple model that is convenient and a great example of tech solutions being used in reusable packaging and in a practical sense. It's a great initiative. So yeah, and now on to our next speaker, who is George Young, who is an inspirational farmer from Bobbing Farm in Essex. And he will share his perspective, striving for circularity in the context of farming, agroforestry and livestock husbandry, and including flour milling, I believe. So perhaps, George, you could tell us more.
Cool. Hopefully this is going to work, sharing my screen. I presume that looks okay. It's on mine, so fingers crossed that's doing the trick. Yeah, so I'll apologise for a start because I've been fencing all day yesterday and today, and so I just kind of took an old presentation because I feel like in farming we just need to have some pictures when we're doing presentation because it looks nicer, and then I've made some notes and I just stripped out some slides, so hopefully it will make some sense. When I normally talk about how I farm, I focus on the idea of agroecology. So I describe myself as an agroecological mixed farmer. Josh mentioned regenerative earlier as one of the ideas. I prefer the term agroecology, and I have a nice simple definition which I like to kind of steer the way that I farm with. And it breaks down to these three tenets that are on the screen. So farming with nature, circular farming, and food sovereignty. Now I'm obviously going to go more into the circular farming part and how that kind of really drives the way that I'm thinking about the farming, but kind of just to talk about the farming with nature and the food sovereignty bit, both of which are also kind of key driving factors. Farming with nature is essentially the idea that you're trying to utilize nature's toolkit to do the jobs on the farm. So rather than going out there and necessarily kind of using machinery or using chemicals or anything like that, we're instead trying to use nature to do that. And the food sovereignty aspect is essentially food security, but where people actually care. So food security is the ability of a nation to feed itself. Food sovereignty is whereby people will actually know where their food comes from, why it's been grown in the way that it's been grown. And I think it kind of really ties to the importance of a circular farming and a circular economy idea, because the only way you're going to get people interested is if they start understanding how the products that they eat are grown or produced or anything like that. And then circular farming, just a nice simple definition, is the idea of kind of trying to maintain your waste streams on farm as much as possible. Any waste that you've got on farm is something that you have produced, it's nutrition that you have grown, and as soon as you sell a waste stream, you're losing nutrition that you want to keep on farm. So that's why circular farming for me is so important. So this is a little bit of a background to the farm. If you want to take a quick screenshot, you can have a look, but it's not very interesting. So essentially, I just thought I'd kind of whiz through how I am trying to build this circular farming system on my farm here. So the most important thing whenever you're growing anything and whenever you're actually producing food is about fertility. And so very simply, you've got to look at a way that maximizes your soil health and your ecological health in a way that really regenerates your soil for an extended period of time. And essentially, when you regenerate your soil over a number of years, it then gives you the chance to essentially mine what you have then created fertility-wise over those previous years. That's essentially how, if you're looking at a regenerative system, my definition of regenerative is to say that over a rotation, so over normally people rotate their crops over sort of 6 to 10 years. If you were to take the start to the end of that rotation, you are regenerative, provided the end of your rotation has a slightly higher, or preferably a much higher, ecological score and a soil health score and all of those things than it did at the beginning. Then you know you're getting better. So the most important thing for me is utilizing these herbal lays. For a start, they're absolutely beautiful and they incentivize a huge amount of ecology to come onto the farm. They're important because they've got lots of different rooting depths. Josh's beautiful pictures earlier really demonstrated kind of what diverse rooting can do. And bear in mind that all these roots actually talk to each other. There are mycorrhizal networks that kind of interact with each other and send nutrition from the top of the soil to the bottom, from the bottom of the soil to the top. There are all these little bugs that move nutrition around as well. It's just flipping amazing what goes on in the soil. And these are the crops that are really critical to do that. If you grow a monoculture crop, so just one crop with everything rooting in the same zone, you just don't get the same effect. But very simply, if you want to get that, your soil health going, your fertility going, and most importantly, your ecology going, it's not good enough just to plant something like a herbal ley, because yes, you could go and mow this with a mower and leave the residue there and let that break down, and that would improve your system somewhat. But also, if you're going through mowing a crop like this, you're also going to be decimating a huge amount of wildlife and ecology, which calls that crop home. So instead, there's a nice little cow selfie with one of my favorite cows. This was back 20 months ago now, I think. I got my first lot of cows on the farm. So these are red pole cows. They're native to the area, which makes a lot of sense to me. It also means that they can be outwintered. So I don't need a shed to house them in over winter. They're out the whole time, so they're always doing good. It also means that they always have dung on the ground, which means you're always supporting life that needs dung. This is a really important one. And of course, everyone knows that dung is a really fantastic fertilizer. So what these animals are doing, it's not a great example on the picture here because they're actually just grazing a meadow, which is just grass. Normally they're grazing those herbal lays, and they're able to obviously convert those herbal lays naturally into really fantastically locked up fertility, organic fertility that's going to last for a really long time. The most important thing for me, I happen to be more focused on ecology than I am anything else on the farm. That's the one thing that really drives me. And the main reason actually for me as to why I needed the cows is this next shot. It's really funny, in the little sphere of farming that I work in, which is very nature-based, there's lots of people who like digging around in cow shit. I also like digging around in cow shit, as you can see from the middle picture, but everyone else likes putting gloves on, which I mean, come on, just grow up. We're all farmers here. A cow poo is just grass. Get your hands dirty. So anyway, I also, the picture on the left was a complete accidental shot I took for an Instagram story, and then realized after the fact it was just absolutely stunning and wish I'd taken it with a better camera. But anyway, so these are my cows. Some of the time they spend living out on conservation grazing. That's what this is here, owned by Essex Wildlife Trust. And it's so cool that you can dig around in any of my cow pats and they are full to the brim of dung beetles, which we've got in the middle here. We've got loads of different types on the farm now. And the really exciting thing is that I have dung beetles because of the way I manage my cows. So I move my cows regularly. I'm trying to get to moving them every day. At the moment, it's about every 5, just a matter of time. But essentially by moving them regularly and putting them on those herbal lays, they actually naturally keep themselves clear of worms, which means you don't need to apply any synthetic wormers. And those synthetic wormers don't just kill the worms in an animal, but they will also kill all the life that's in the soil wherever they poo and wherever they pee. So it's really important to try and create a system where you don't need all these horrendous chemicals that we kind of come to live by. So anyway, this is kind of how I'm building my fertility and building the ecology on farm. And essentially what that then enables me to do, hopefully if this is the right slide next. Hey, it is. So one of the things I've done is to diversify my cropping. So here are some of the examples of things I've tried. Some of these are still sticking. Some of them have fallen out of favor a bit, but we got buckwheat on the left, then we got hemp. That was some lupins I tried in the middle. That was a disaster. I've had a few disasters in my time. It's all part of the fun. And then we've had some flax. So I've played around with flax for linen production, as well as flax for linseed. And then on the right, we've got lentils that I grow for a company called Hodmedod, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. I've also moved into growing heritage wheat crops. So essentially modern cultivars of wheat, modern varieties that people grow, have very kind of shallow rooting systems. They're not very good at utilizing the nutrition that's in the ground. So I've moved to older varieties of wheat, which enable, basically they can access a much deeper depth of soil, and they will also, we're hoping to get some research done on this, but in theory it means that the grain that they produce should actually have more micronutrition in it, especially since they yield lower from a macronutrition basis. They yield lower, so they should have more micronutrition. It should be actually a better quality food when you eat this type of food. But like I say, that's not been proven yet, but it seems to make sense, so I like it. And then this was another system where I'm kind of really looking at kind of making sure that my farm produces as diverse a wealth of food as possible, in a way that happens to function really, really successfully from lots of standpoints. So from an ecological standpoint, from a livestock welfare standpoint. So the idea of agroforestry is that you essentially have belts of trees. So my belts are 6 meters wide where the trees run. And then the gaps in between the trees, mine are 36 meters wide, is where you can grow crops or rear your livestock. Obviously, my trees are little at the moment, but once they grow up, they will shelter the livestock. They also shelter the crop, so they prevent disease spread throughout your crop. And they also, I'm growing a massive amount of stuff. Here's my list of stuff that I'm growing. It's an awful lot. A lot of this is to work out what actually functions on my farm. But obviously, this is a great way of trying to make sure that we're maximizing the nutritional output of the farm that we've got here. So beyond just wheat and things like that. This is a fun little picture. This is like so much work to get to this stage. A huge amount of planning. It took 5 years to plan the agroforestry, which went in 20 months ago. But actually having my cows in amongst the trees was an absolutely epic feeling. And then to make sure that I've got a market for all of these things, you do also have to sometimes go a little bit above and beyond what a normal farmer does. So I've invested far too much time and quite enough money in this stone mill, which is on the farm. This is some buckwheat flour, which I've been selling lately. And from this September, we're going to be selling a lot of heritage wheat flour as well, which is quite exciting. And I've also got a decorticator, which enables me, hopefully, to decorticate the buckwheat, i.e. sell the kernels, the groats that you get from the middle of buckwheat. And also it means I can de-hull things like my spelt crops, which have an extra hull on the outside you have to remove before you can mill the spelt. So that's been quite fun. And obviously this is an important part of making sure that I'm retaining as much waste on the farm as possible, because all the waste from the milling, that's a nutritional product that I grew, gets to stay on the farm and doesn't get lost from the farm. And then just some very quick additional projects that I'm looking at. We will be doing a market garden in the future. We will also be having an on-farm slaughtery and butchers on the farm, and also a dairy as well as the plan. The butchery is the most important one to talk about here, because actually all the eviscerate you get when you slaughter an animal is taken away. That's all stuff that I've grown on my farm. Now, there's a hell of a lot of hoops I've got to jump through, but in theory, if I can do in-vessel composting of that, as well as growing a lot of kind of willow and hazel, which I can compost together with a bit of straw and with all the blood and guts of the animals that I've grown on farm, that's going to be the most banging compost for my fruit trees, and a perfect example of maintaining those waste products on the farm and ensuring that I'm only actually exporting the food products itself. I'm aware that I'm running very slightly over time, so obviously those are all my initial things. I've also got a wild seam project that I just put a little thing up on Twitter today if you want to hear about that. But in terms of ecology, that's probably the most exciting thing that I'm doing on the farm. Anyway, I'm Farming George. Thanks very much for listening and being so polite. And I will stop sharing my screen, and I think we've got some Q&As next.
Thank you so much for those three really brilliant presentations. It was absolutely fantastic to hear both Josh and George speak, so we can understand a bit about the principles and those kind of ideas that sit behind the circular economy, and then move on to some of the really practical and interesting ways that George is bringing these sort of nature-friendly and nature-based ideas to life, and then also to hear about Colobox as well. Thank you, Joe, and how there's a day-to-day solution out there for us to make changes and also to kind of improve our experience of how we're eating our food when we're out and about as well. So thank you all. We're going to move on to some questions today. George, we've had a couple from you, and because we've just you're just finished, I'm just going to come back with one question from one of the crowd, which is, can you talk a bit about the economic viability of your farm, and how do you convince farmers to do what you do?
So I mean, I always say that, you know, it's essentially horses for courses for a lot of this stuff. So I am very much obsessed with putting ecology first. So I have spent, you know, an awful lot of money on doing that, and I'm funding a lot of this having gone into stewardship in quite a large way. So that has enabled me to do the fencing that's so important for like this wild seam project that I'm working on at the moment. But quite frankly, the agroforestry, which, don't get me wrong, is an expensive project anyway, but there is a lot of funding available from the Woodland Trust. So I was lucky to get funding from the Woodland Trust there for that. When I say additional costs, they haven't funded the fencing that I'm doing at the moment and the wood chip that I had to put around them and a load of other bits and pieces. It's not to say they didn't fund it to a great extent, but it's still an expensive project, of course. In terms of viability, what I'm trying to do is essentially shift how my farm works within an economic framework. So the problem when it comes to, so essentially whenever you're too small, your products are going to be too expensive. So I'm trying to be of a certain scale to make sure that I'm fairly pricing my products. But essentially, you want to make yourself a price maker. If you're in a commodity system, you are a price taker. You can't dictate the price that your product should be. So my aim is to be a price maker on everything that I'm doing, sell a fantastic story, which I'm hoping that I'm able to do. And in which case, I hope people are willing to pay the price premium on that product. But that being said, I am still trying to make sure that I'm working at a scale which ensures that the price that I am charging is still fair to the consumer.
Thank you, George. And I'm going to come to another question from the group that is also around price points. And this is for Josh. So I'm going to come back to you, Josh. And it's a recognition about the circular principles of food product design sounding fantastic. And I must say the graphics were really beautiful to sit behind the presentation that you gave. And the question from Simon is, do you feel the principle can work for all price points of food products? So I don't know if you've seen that question, if you need an elaboration, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, I saw it. I have had a little think. This is a quite a classic question that we get with the circular economy, and I would say, firstly, yes, it is a challenge. Like, I don't pretend that the transition comes with costs, and that could increase prices potentially. But firstly, the reality is we have food, well, I wouldn't say food poverty. We have poverty now in the UK and elsewhere. And until recently, food prices have never actually been lower in terms of a percentage of people's income. So if 10% of the population can't afford food now, it's a deeper problem than the affordability of food. It's about incomes. It's about our whole economy and the way that it works. But going back to the price points, yeah, as I said, this is a challenge. For the 90% of people that can afford food, we can't afford to not do the transition, because ultimately we need to diversify what we eat. We need to reduce the amount of meat. That's not saying that we can't ever eat it, but we just need to diversify and think. So we can't afford to not do this transition. We need a wider set of policy package support to help those on low incomes. And I would also say this food design thing can be designed on lots of different principles. When you think about byproducts, the upcycling element of that design strategy, these are typically waste products that would probably cost money to throw away. So if you're creating these new opportunities with these products, they might not cost that much. But again, these are all hypotheticals. I would finally just end on, I think there was a reference to the better food traders and things, and that the circular economy is not advocating for one, I guess, system over the other. Like, we still need retailers and we still need decentralized local food providers. And that between these two, I guess, different models that can support efficiency and sufficiency, we can find price points and business models and pricing models where everyone can access food at a fair price. And I know people like growing communities in Hackney, they have food models where people can pay like slightly less to access what they need. I think that's enough for me.
Brilliant, thank you, Josh. And it's really brilliant to end there actually on some other kind of local community based examples, as well as people that are looking into these issues. So I'm going to come back to Joe. Joe, I think you answered some of these questions in the chat, but I thought it might be interesting just to bring these to life for those that aren't looking onto the chat. But you had some questions about your packaging and how containers are stored and stacked, and how volumes are managed, and what you might be looking at in terms of projections if your service expands.
Yeah, so we actually did a lot of testing in the beginning to try to design a kiosk to see whether it's better to stack, drop freely. We prefer for it to be dropped freely because that means that we can kind of like make sure that people close it, put it in, so that the health and safety like part of it can be like resolved. But after a lot of testing, we just find that stacking and not stacking, there's about a $5 difference. And because the kiosks themselves hold like up to 70 boxes, so the $5 difference for us is worth making sure that people close it before they drop it in, so separating them and then stacking, right? And I think that's kind of how we approach these kind of problems. We tested a lot with people and then see which one works better. People are more willing to engage with and how it ends up, like how different it is, and still compromise that. About scale, we actually, for some of the places that we work in, we have pretty big scales. So we work in some of the canteens and like offices. And I think the biggest canteen that we work in is in an office with 9,000 people, and more than 1,000 boxes are being used every day. So cost of the system itself is really automatic. So it can actually, it's a lot of different, like it can accompany a lot of people, sorry. And it's not really a big problem. And the issue there comes from kind of experience and also analyzing the data and making sure we have the right amount of boxes each places, and then being able to like accompany that in kind of space and how many kiosks we need to see, where we need to. And a lot of that is experience. Well, I feel like there are a few questions.
Yeah, we've got some more questions coming. I'm going to come back to you, Joe, actually, and open one to all of the panelists, because I'm conscious that we're getting close to time for Q&A, and we've got some such incredibly interesting comments and questions coming. But it would be really great to hear from you. What people and organisations have inspired you along the way as you've been questing and designing your kind of circular system? And I'll bring that to all the panelists. Joe, are you happy to start with that?
Do you mind just quickly repeating?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to ask all of the panelists to just let us know if there are particular people or organisations that have helped inspire you as you've been designing your project or working in circular food systems.
One of my biggest idols is Tristram Stewart, and I was very lucky to be able to work with him really, really early on in my career. And he's always been an inspiration. And one of my favorite things has always been toast, because I think that it is such a simple way in terms of campaigning and also later in scale, like to be able to not just talk about very serious things which exist, like in all of these, but also to be able to engage in people in a way where it is really fun and people want to actively come up to you and ask you about these things, and they feel proud and like entertained and happy to actually engage. And I feel like that's the human behavioral side of it is a very interesting part.
Thank you. And can I come next to Josh? And could you also start thinking, panelists, about kind of the one bit of advice that you would give to us as food kind of activists and consumers about what we could each do to be more circular in the way that we consume food? Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, I would. I think Joe's idea of Tristram is a good one. I would, in terms of food, I would. Well, in terms of the circular economy, I'd probably start with Ellen MacArthur, as it's probably an open goal if I didn't say that. Her story is incredible, and I would encourage anyone to watch any of her TED Talks as a way of starting to understand the role of circular economy. In food, I would say there's organizations like Sustain who are incredible. I am a subscriber of the Jelly Deal. It's great. It's a nice, it's just a really important way of reconnecting people back to the food that they eat. But there are two, I would say Abby Rose, who runs the Farmerama podcast, is also amazing. The stuff that she puts together, and just the whole Sustainable Food Trust, the organization. They have some really useful insights and framing and thinking about the role of farmers. That's it.
Sorry, thank you, Josh. And can I come to you, George, please?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, for me, I am very, very lucky that I've met some astonishing farmers in my time, and people who I'm just able to pick up the phone to, which feels amazing. So, I mean, from an agroforestry perspective, Stephen Briggs, I'm very lucky that I got to know him very well on a course about 4 years ago, and yeah, he's been a very useful person to know. And then, I mean, I know a lot of it is via Instagram actually, and I'm sure there's a way of seeing the people who I interact most with on Instagram, because they are all phenomenal farmers. There's an incredible cattle farmer called Jeff Williams down in Cornwall. I finally went to see his farm a couple of weeks back. And also actually from, like I said, like the ecology thing is such a big part of what I'm doing. So actually, Chris Jones, who is a big proponent of beavers. He's got beavers on his farm, and it's phenomenal what they're doing at his farm at St Cornwall as well. And then Charlie Burrell, obviously NEP, for me has been really inspirational, and especially now the fact that they're bringing a regenerative food side to that wilding part of their farm. So Russ McKenzie, I think his name is, it's Russ anyway, is starting kind of the beef herd there, and also looking at getting market gardeners and things like that. So I think those guys are doing some really, really tremendous stuff.
Fantastic, thank you so much. That's just such a good broad spectrum of people that we can look up and start thinking about, and how we can infiltrate these thoughts into our day-to-day. And I think we do have time just to have a really, really quick recommendation from each of you about the one thing that we could each all do differently to apply more circular principles into the way that we eat and consume food. So I'm going to come to Josh. Can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, sure. I would use our big food redesign strategies. So source regenerative or agroecological produce where possible, source diverse food, upcycle food, and source lower impact foods.
Thank you, Josh. Joe, I'm going to come to you next.
I mean, I'm gonna just say, like, use collie box, we reuse more. But I think on a more personal level, I started my career out as a campaigner. I think grassroots campaigning is extremely important. Having your voice heard is extremely important. Being really loud and annoying and like bang your pots and pans is very important, because ultimately we can do a lot, you know, personally, but the most important thing is to try to create an infrastructure that actually enables change, and that only happens when we're all really loud and obnoxious about it.
Thank you, Joe. And on to you, George, please, for the final comment.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there are actually some really, really good websites now that enable you to actually understand where your food comes from and actually support those people who are doing really incredible stuff. So I'd definitely pump the Peer for Life, Pasture for Life website, where they're showing, you know you're buying livestock that have been reared in a way that is really actually fantastic for carbon sequestration and fantastic for ecology, which is not necessarily the case with meat that you buy from the supermarket. And I'd say, as well as that, there are, if you start looking at smaller bakeries and things like that, not necessarily tiny, I supply a bakery called Floor that's absolutely fantastic in Spa Terminus, near Bermondsey, and these are people who actually kind of genuinely care about where they're sourcing their flour from, understand the people who are growing it. If you find bakeries or food suppliers like that who really care, then you can feel confident buying from them, that they are supporting the right sort of farmers. So that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you also, Dan, for capturing all of these really useful suggestions and links in the chat. So everybody who's still in, please do make sure you have a look and see if you can connect to some of the organisations and businesses that are doing brilliant things in this area. We've got just 2 minutes left, so I'm going to say a huge thank you to our speakers and to everybody who has participated today, and to all of the partners for Food Talks as well. It's been a really fantastic session. It would be great to hear from the audience today about how you found the session. So we're going to finish with another short poll, which Dan's going to share on his screen. So again, if you can take the same action, please, and put menti.com into your browser, and the code is being highlighted by Dan at 81471528. And please do let us know what insights you've taken from today's Food Talk. So you should be able to just type in anything that you've captured from today. And we will get, as promised, this session recorded and put online on our Food Talks website. So please do head to the Food Talks website if you want to catch up and hear again, or share with any of your colleagues or friends what we've discussed this evening. And look out for any future Food Talks events. We'll be in touch soon with details of the next session. Thank you so much. It'd be great if you can carry on onto the Menti. Thank you, everybody who's inputting. Really helpful, and great to see that there are so many places that we can connect with one another, different solutions that are out there. I also really value the bit about being loud. So thanks, Joe. Fantastic. Okay. Is there another slide, Dan? And if you could let us know a bit about how you found today, in terms of if you've learned something new, if you're feeling part of a community, or if you're feeling motivated to do something. So again, if you could strongly disagree or strongly agree with the statements, and this will help us think about our Food Talks for the future. Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. That's a really encouraging way to end. I'm going to close the session. Thanks so much again for all of your time and everyone's efforts in bringing together today's event, and have lovely evenings. Take care.